Hello there, I'm Michelle. I'm a licensed massage therapist in Washington, and I bring you MBLEx study resources here on YouTube. I have tons of videos to help you to be able to tackle that test. And I also have tons of stuff on my website. I have free practice tests, I have study guides, I have courses, a lot of free stuff, ebooks too, to help you to be able to get ready for your MBLEx with calm and confidence, feeling really good about getting into it. I want you to be successful at the Massage and Bodywork licensing exam. Now, today we're going to be kicking off the second video in the nervous system set within the umbrella of anatomy and physiology. I've been doing a whole series the last couple weeks, and it'll still go on a couple more weeks, where I'm just going section by section through each system of the body and teaching you what you need to know in order to pass the MBLEx. And it's also a great supplemental study resource for those of you who are currently in massage school and can't quite wrap your head around some of the concepts. And I hope that I can help out with that. So today, what we're going to be talking about is central nervous system anatomy. We're going to be talking about the meninges and the cerebrospinal fluid. We're going to be talking about the spinal cord, and then we're going to talk about the brain. So the structure and the function of each of those things within the central nervous system. And then we're going to end it all with practice questions. We're going to be integrating information that we learned in the last video, which was an overview of the nervous system. And we're just going to go a step further. So something that I do want to mention is that there is so much more to know regarding the nervous system in general, specifically the central nervous system. This is just what you need to know in order to pass the MBLEx, okay? And so I'm going to take my time and explain everything because I want you guys to absorb the information rather than just memorizing just for memorizing's sake. It really helps you to feel calm and to be able to just go do the test because you've fully integrated what you need to know in order to be a successful body worker. So yeah, just explaining it just from the perspective of a regular person and not a scientist or a doctor or, I'm not trying to teach you guys brain surgery. So it's not everything you need to know. And also regarding pathologies, I'm not going to be going over pathologies in this series at all, specifically to the nervous system, but I do have a video that is specific to nervous system pathologies and how to work with those as a body worker. That's really important information for the MBLEx. So go check that video out. Also, I have a whole pathologies course on my website, so you can just watch the whole thing. And without any further ado, we'll just go ahead and get going. All right, so the central nervous system is the body's command center. The brain and spinal cord working together to interpret information, make decisions, and send out responses. Protected by layers of meninges and cushioned by cerebrospinal fluid, the central nervous system manages everything from simple reflexes to the most complex thoughts and emotions. Every movement, sensation, and healing process depends on this intricate network's coordination and balance. So this is important for massage therapists and body workers because it helps you to understand the brain and body connection so that you can refine your touch and your pressure and your pacing during treatment. Understanding the spinal cord and nerve pathways helps you to recognize patterns of referred pain or nerve compression. Awareness of meningeal and cerebrospinal protection supports safe work around the head, neck, and spine. And recognizing how the central nervous system mediates stress, relaxation, and pain perception helps therapists promote nervous system regulation and client recovery. All right, that's enough story time. Let's go ahead and get going here. So, 3 parts to the central nervous system. We got the brain. That's the center for the higher level processing. That's your emotions, your perception, all that stuff. And then the spinal cord. Whoa, I forgot the S. I was looking for all my typos, but I missed that one. The spinal cord carries out sensory information to and motor information away from the brain. So it is sort of a highway to spread out the information throughout the body, but it also does a little tiny bit of processing with interneurons that live inside of the spinal cord, and that's where our reflexes come from. So you touch something hot, we jump back. Somebody pops your patellar tendon, and it makes your knee go blip or your leg go blip. It flexes up, boink. So yeah, the reflexes, a lot of the reflexes live in the spinal cord. Some of them live in the brainstem. We're gonna go over that here in this video. And then finally, the packaging around that, those processing centers is called the Meninges, which are kind of like a plastic covering, a tough covering around everything to keep it safe. The cerebrospinal fluid is the shock absorption, the liquid, and it's also a little bit of a circulatory system as well when it comes to nourishing and removing waste from the brain and spinal cord. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Meninges, protection, cushioning, and nourishing. It has 3 different membranes. So let's talk about each layer as we go through this. It's like a coating that just packages the entire central nervous system. Disorganized, fibrous, connective tissue. Okay, so it's squiggly tissues. I think tissues is unit 4 in this video series for anatomy and physiology. If you want to understand all the different kinds of connective tissue, that's super important for understanding the structures of all of the different organs and systems in our bodies. So go ahead and check that out. But yeah, dura mater is the first layer, and dura means tough, mater means mother in Latin. So that will help you. Tough mother, the tough outer packaging, like a rubber. I said plastic, but I would say it's more like a rubber coating around the whole central nervous system package. Let's see, this is the arachnoid space. So this is the dura mater right there. So we got like the skin, and we have fascial layers, an adipose layer, and then we have the dura mater, which is right here. That's a big, thick covering. And there's some gaps in these 2 layers of the dura mater, and that's where some blood vessels are, and it's also this little sticky outie is where the cerebrospinal fluid comes in. What do they call that? Venous sinus, right in the split, right in the center of the 2 different lobes of the brain. There's a place where the cerebrospinal fluid, a gap in the dura mater, where it gets reabsorbed into the bloodstream. The next layer down below the dura mater is this, you see this like webby network right here? That would be the arachnoid mater. Arachnoid is referring to spiders, and mater is mother. So each of these layers is a mother protecting her little baby central nervous system. This is inside the skull, by the way. I guess this wouldn't be adipose tissue, this would be the skull, okay? So under the skull is the dura mater, under that is the arachnoid mater. So there's the first layer here of the arachnoid, and it's got these little hairs that come down and creates this spidery network. This network also helps to absorb some of that cerebrospinal fluid to go back up into the bloodstream, but it also just creates a gap that has fibers that hold it in place. Sort of like the spongy bone in our bones that create like a network of rebar for the fluid to flow in. Cerebrospinal fluid lives in the arachnoid mater pocket. And then on the inner layer, we have those ependymal cells that are kind of like epithelial cells, and that they create fluid. That's where the cerebrospinal fluid is created. That cushions our brain and our spinal cord. So it goes all the way down the spinal cord too. These layers go all the way down the spinal cord, and there's even a layer in the center of the spinal cord as well. And then the very thin, gentle, tender mother would be the pia mater. And this is the brain here. and this brain and spinal cord. And the thinnest layer is on the very outside of that, between the arachnoid mater and the cerebrospinal fluid and the brain. Okay, so it creates that connective tissue base for the ependymal cells, and it supports blood vessels and veins that go into the brain. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about cerebrospinal fluid. This is a really important structure in our body to keep that nervous system safe. So it lives in that subarachnoid space that I just explained, and also lives in a central canal of the spinal cord, and then it coats around the spinal cord as well. And it goes up inside of the brain. So I'm going to show an image of that real quick. It's actually created in the center of the brain, and it flows out through these pockets, kind of like a cave system inside of the brain. It flows in and around. It's primarily composed of water and electrolytes. Those are ions. So in this ionic atmosphere, it's conducive to neurotransmission. We need a lot of ions for that. I'm going to explain that in a future video. And also other little substances like glucose and proteins and lipids, which are all for nutrient exchange. The functions of the cerebrospinal fluid, like I said, shock absorption for when we're bumping our heads, nutrition, and it's a barrier to blood-borne pathogens. This is what they call the blood-brain barrier. And then it filters waste from the Meninges layers. So here's how it circulates. It gets started in the center, in the cave system, inside of the brain, and there's these big pockets, like big mega caves. So there's like big mega caves inside of here that we call ventricles. And so the ependymal cells create that fluid, squirts it out, it goes through the caves, and then it circulates around through those caves and then around the outside of the brain, inside of the meninges, and then it goes down the spinal cord, up into the center of the spinal cord, back up and around, and it gets reabsorbed in those arachnoid spaces and also up into that venous cavity between the lobes, the two lobes of the cerebrum. Okay, so we're moving on to talking about the second structure that's important to the central nervous system, and that is the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is typically 16 to 18 inches long, depending on how long your spine is. It's 3/4 of an inch in diameter. That's 2 centimeters. And it's located in the vertebral foramen of the spinal column. So right down the center of that spine cage that keeps it safe, keeps that central nervous system safe, because it's squishy and it's likely to get in trouble, and that will mess with your ability to do your processing. So yeah, like I said, central canal with cerebrospinal fluid, and it starts at the foramen magnum, which is the big hole at the base of your cranium, and then it goes down through the vertebrae C1 all the way down to L1. It doesn't go all the way down the lumbar, but instead the cauda equina goes from L2 down to the coccyx vertebrae. They call it the horse's tail. So that is just kind of like another, like a bundle of nerves that stick out from that spinal cord, but it's not protected with meninges. So there are 31 transverse segments. Transverse meaning across, right? Going across the way. So between every vertebrae, there's a transverse segment, and that's where the nerve roots emerge out the sides. We have two sets. We have the ventral and dorsal nerve roots that come out of that spinal cord. So let's talk a little bit more about the structure of the spinal cord and how those nerves come out and how the information is conveyed up and down the spinal cord. All right, let's first talk about gray matter versus white matter. I have to be honest that when I was taking my anatomy and physiology course in And both in my undergraduate years and also my massage course, I really tuned this out because I had convinced myself that it was hard to learn, but it's actually really simple now that I'm like relearning it to teach you guys. So remember in the last video we were talking about myelination of axons. So the axons are the information highways that compose a neuron. And this myelination is a lipid coating that goes around it, and it keeps it from being ionically charged, the axon from being ionically charged, so that information can just go right down the center. Well, so we're saying white matter is where the lipids are, the fat is, right? And the gray matter is the actual like cell bodies, the interneurons, and they are not myelinated. And so because they're ionically charged, they stick together in the middle. So imagine that there's like all of this cell body stuff, and it's all like all these tails are sticking out. And some of those tails go right down the center, like right down the length of the spinal cord. And those create a tract, which is the information going up and information going down. So we have sensory tracts that are going to be going up the spinal cord, going up toward the brain. And we have motor tracts that are going down the spinal cord, going out to give the information out to your periphery. So here's how the tracts work. I want to show you guys. And just real quick, there are also some glial cells that hold everything together. But yeah, interneurons, that's like the reflex processing, live in the gray matter. And the motor neurons come in here and they're like, oh yeah, I got that information, they come out. But mostly the sensory tubes that are going up live in the white areas. What all do you need to know about that? What white matter is, what gray matter is, the fact that nerve roots come out. But another thing that you need to understand is the difference between the dorsal and the ventral tracts. And I thought this was going to be hard, but it actually isn't hard at all once you understand it fundamentally. And I'm going to try to keep this really simple. If we cut the spinal cord across transversally, and we're looking at it superiorly, here's the gray matter, here's the white matter, okay? Let's cut it in half again across the frontal plane so that we have the front and back. Dorsal, posterior, that's your backside where your butt is, right? So the backside is where all the sensory information is going up, all right? So you like, think of your tail, think of your booty. The information is coming from your legs up into your booty, and then it runs all the way up it's like, ooh, that beach sand is warm, and it runs all the way up to your brain. All of that sensory information is going to be in the tracts that live on the back side of the spinal cord, the posterior. So whenever they're talking about dorsal this and dorsal that, referring to the central nervous system, it's really simple. It's just the back side of the spinal column. All right. And then the anterior part is where all the motor information is coming down. Okay. So let's say the sensory information comes up, that you stepped on your kid's Lego. The sensory information goes up, and then your processing happens in your brain that says, oh, I hate those Legos. And it tells you to reach down, pick up the Lego and throw it because you're so frustrated. Okay. Now that information is going down the anterior aspect of the spinal cord. So all those tracts of information going down to your hand to bend over and pick up that Lego is coming down the front. So you imagine your stomach side, all that information is going down the front. Okay, so pretty simple. I hope that helps. Just a couple other terms here. There's the nerve roots coming out. You see how these two nerve roots come back together, join back together again? That's what happens all over your body. They split apart and they come back together. But all the sensory information is coming out of the roots that are coming out of the back of your spinal cord, the dorsal part of the spinal cord. All the motor information is coming out of, it's going in, the sensory information is going in. And there's interneurons in the middle that make decisions, and the motor information is going out, okay? Information coming in, information going out. Information coming in, information going out. In the last video, I briefly talked about ganglia. The ganglia is like a switchboard, a fuse box, where multiple synapses are happening, where the connections between several neurons is happening. Okay. All right. So moving on from the spinal cord to talk about the brain. And there are 4 different parts of the brain that you need to know about as massage therapists and body workers. Okay. We have the cerebrum, which is the most of the brain. This is the big part, right? We have the diencephalon, which is at the base. We have the brainstem that goes down into the spinal cord, and we have this squiggly stuff at the back of your head, underneath or inside of your occipital area, called the cerebellum. Okay, so let's talk about the functions of each of these parts of the brain. So the brain stem, that's down here, is the reflex center. So carrying on more of the stuff that the spinal cord will do. Missed my eye and monitors. Okay, so it monitors and regulates blood pressure and breathing, and it's continuous with the spinal cord. The diencephalon, we're going to talk about the different parts of that. It's deep in the center of the brain. It continues those reflexes and can start sorting information, and it's also a pathway between the different parts of the brain. So information flows through that area. And then the cerebellum maintains balance of posture, helps coordinate voluntary and reflexive, it's mostly voluntary muscle activities for smooth and skilled movement. And then the cerebrum, most of the higher level processing, your emotional stuff, your cognitive stuff, happens in the cerebrum. So first we're going to talk about the brain stem. That's this part right here. These 2 are the other parts of the brain. All this stuff is the rest of it. The brain stem is just this stuff in here. It has 3 different parts. So like I said, it monitors blood pressure. There's some reflexes that happen in there. It carries on some of the activities of the spinal cord. Information flows through it from the rest of the body to go up into these higher processing areas. So the first part at the base is the medulla oblongata. That is where motor tracts switch sides. That's why some of the processing for your right side of the brain, for your right side of your body, happens in your left side of your brain. That's why it's mirrored, is because the tracts switch sides at the medulla oblongata. It regulates coughing, hiccuping, sneezing, so some of those reflexive stuff. And then it monitors and adjusts heart rate and blood vessel diameter. And then the pons is the bridge. Pons means bridge, that where the tracks with connecting links to this. It's the bridge between the cerebrum and the cerebellum. And then it helps us with facial expressions. And then finally, the midbrain. I guess it did go up. The brainstem did go up in here. Sorry, guys. All right, so the midbrain coordinates the eyes, head, and neck in response to visual stimuli. Look at that. Look at that. Sends auditory impulses to the thalamus, and it helps with muscle contraction and coordination. So real quick about the reticular activating system, in case you get questioned on that for the MBLEx. It's a filter for information, and that happens in the midbrain. It controls your wakefulness and your sleep-wake cycles, okay? But also, it filters information. It helps you to be able to not absorb everything. So you're not like, that's what it is. You're not mentally processing every piece of information that comes out. It decides what you need to know and what you don't need to know. So at first it might be like, ooh, hypervigilant about everything. And then over time, it's like, okay, you need to know about this stimulation happening less and less. So you don't freak out every time that you step outside the door. It gets you used to stuff. Diencephalon is the next section, the second of 4 parts of the brain. It's deep inside the center of the brain, like deep in there. So we have the pons and the midbrain here. And so it's like this collection of little tiny things in here. And it continues with the reflexes, and it starts with processing. So we have the thalamus, which is this like liver looking blob right here. It's, sorts and prioritizes sensory information for relay to this cerebrum. It, initially interpretates sensory information, helps regulate sleep, wakefulness, anger, and aggression. So I need another G in there, darn it. And then hypothalamus, it connects to the endocrine systems. So more reflexive stuff. The endocrine systems are kind of the regulators of your body. And so, your brain tells the hypothalamus to tell the glands what to do. Structurally and functionally connected to the pituitary gland. See, the pituitary is down here. Boop, boop, boop. Okay. And then the pineal gland is sticking out back here, sticking out of the back of the thalamus. It secretes melatonin, which helps you to be asleep or awake. That's why it's connected to the thalamus. All right, so cerebrum, boom, the brain, right? Okay, so there's going to be a thin layer of gray matter around the outside. What was gray matter? Gray matter are where the interneurons live. It's the unmyelinated part. So that's where a lot of that gray matter is, where a lot of the processing happens. That's why we used to say, you only use a certain fraction of your brain. That would be to say that the axons, the myelinated areas where the information is traveling, is not being used, which isn't true. We are using every part of our brain. It's just the actual processing part only happens in the gray part. It's divided into 2 hemispheres, the left, your left, and the right, your right, okay? And all these little folds, so the grooves are called sulci, and the ridges, the high parts are called gyri, I think it's gyri, and the grooves are called sulci. So, and then of course we have the big groove right down the center. That's where we reabsorb that cerebrospinal fluid. There's blood vessels that go in there. And there are divisions within this, and I'll point it out again in the next slide, but each of the areas of the cerebrum are called lobes, and they are associated with the cranial bones. So let's say, because I see the cerebellum back here, that's the back of your head. So this would be the front part. That would be the frontal lobe, right and left frontal lobes. On the sides, we have the temporal lobes, right and left. Then we have the parietal lobes, which are kind of on the top and on the sides. And then in the back, we have the occipital lobe. Okay. And then basal ganglia is, even though there's the coating of the gray matter and there's a lot of white stuff. See, this is where activity happens typically in the cerebrum. We also have the basal ganglia, which is, I talked about ganglia, it's kind of a switchboard where a bunch of information comes together, and it's like got a coating of the satellite cells, which are glial cells. It's where a bunch of information gets processed and sends that information to the midbrain and the diencephalon. All right, so conscious thinking, problem solving, learning and memory, emotion, sensory perception, general perception, conceptualization, all of our complex processing that All the things that we do that give us anxiety and give us frustration happens in the cerebral cortex, which is that gray coating all around the outside of our cerebrum. Okay, that's the cerebral cortex. So what structures are most important for us to remember? Cerebral cortex and the basal ganglia. Sorry, I didn't start with cerebral cortex, with being the gray matter on the outside, but that's what it is. And once again, I wanted to just mention that the lobes that happens, this is the lateral view of the brain. This is just a little image I found in my Canva, the options. Closest thing I could find to how it would separate the different lobes. So we've got here the frontal lobe, and let's pretend this brown, pink, and blue are all the parietal, and then the side the green would be the temporal lobe, and then the brown would be the occipital lobe. And down here we have the cerebellum. We're going to talk about that next. It's located in the back of the brain, right back here. Boop, 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 this stuff. And it's all about coordinating your fine-tuned movements. So ballet dancers have very fine-tuned cerebellums. Okay, last thing. The limbic system, which is typically in the basal ganglia, that's in the center of the brain. This is an image that I found that kind of represents it. So let's go back to that basal ganglia and see what it looked like. Okay, so what happens in there? It's a bunch of connected structures in the brain which processes memory and emotion, controls the unconscious aspects of our behavior, and it controls basic emotions: fear, pleasure, anger, and your drives like hunger, sex, dominance, and care of your offspring. So you know what the limbic system is in case that's a random question that you end up with. It is not the same as the autonomic nervous systems that we're going to be talking about in the next video. It's a central processing area where your unconscious stuff happens. Okay, so that's all the information that you need to know. And now we're just going to go over some practice questions so you know what kinds of questions you might have regarding this information. And it helps to dial in the information that I just provided to you. So let's get going. Which of the following statements accurately describes the meninges and cerebrospinal fluid of the central nervous system? Okay, so we're looking for one correct answer about the meninges, which are the packaging around the central nervous system, and the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, so let's find the correct description. A, the meninges consist of 3 layers: dura mater, pia mater, and myelin sheath, all which produce cerebrospinal fluid. Is that a correct statement? Dura mater, pia mater, and myelin sheath. Okay, B. Cerebrospinal fluid is found only inside the ventricles of the brain and does not circulate around the spinal cord. Is that true? Cerebrospinal fluid? Only in the ventricles? C. The meninges protect the brain and spinal cord, while cerebrospinal fluid cushions, nourishes, and removes waste from nervous tissue. Okay. D. The meninges are located only around the brain, and the spinal cord is protected by connective tissue instead. All right. Well, so I'm saying the meninges are all over the spinal, they're all over the spinal cord as well as the brain. So D is false. C, I'm just going up. The meninges protect the brain and spinal cord. True. Cerebrospinal fluid cushions, nourishes, and removes waste. Okay, that looks good. B, cerebrospinal fluid is found only inside the ventricles. That is not true. It's also found around the spinal cord. And then A, meninges consist of 3 layers: dura mater, pia mater, and arachnoid matter, not the myelin sheath. And they don't all produce cerebrospinal fluid. The only structures that produce cerebrospinal fluid is the ependymal cells that live on the pia mater layer. Okay. Explanation: the meninges encase the brain and spinal cord, providing protection and stability. Cerebrospinal fluid flows within the subarachnoid space and ventricles, cushioning the central nervous system, transporting nutrients, and removing waste. Next question. Which of the following statements about the anatomy of the spinal cord is correct? A, the spinal cord contains ascending, that means going up, sensory tracts and descending motor tracts that connect the body to the brain. Okay, is correct. We're looking for one correct answer, okay? Anatomy of the spinal cord. So, the spinal cord has ascending tracts and ascending sensory tracts, which is true. Descending motor tracts. Okay, A looks good. B, gray matter is located on the outside of the spinal cord, surrounding inner white matter tracts. I don't like that one, okay? Because remember, gray matter is inside of the spinal cord, first off, right? C, the spinal cord extends the full length of the vertebral column, ending at the coccyx, which is not true. It ends at L1, okay? D, the spinal cord is made entirely of motor neurons and does not contain sensory pathways, which is not true. It contains both sensory and motor pathways. So I liked A the best. Ascending sensory tracts, that means going up, and descending motor tracts, going down. Okay. The spinal cord is a two-way communication pathway between the brain and the body. Ascending tracts carry sensory information to the brain, while descending tracts send motor commands to the body. It ends at the level of L1, L2 vertebrae and has gray matter in the center surrounded by white matter. Next question. Which statement best describes the functional organization of the spinal cord? Best description for the functional organization, how it works. Functional organization is how it works. Best description. Okay, so we're looking for one answer that's the best. So what is the functional organization of the spinal cord? So A, the dorsal, which is the back part, roots of the spinal nerves carry motor commands from the brain to the body. Do you remember the difference? What we were talking about? I'm just going to say this real quick. The dorsal or posterior roots carried information into the spinal cord from the rest of the body for processing. All right, so that's not true. B, the ventral anterior roots transmit sensory information, which isn't true. That's where the information goes out, is through the ventral roots in the front, on your stomach side, right? Or chest side. C, the spinal cord's gray matter integrates reflexes while white matter conducts information between the brain and the peripheral nerves. I like that one. Okay, and D, the spinal cord functions only as a relay center and has no role in reflex activity, which is not true. So C would be the correct answer. And that is the spinal cord's gray matter integrates reflexes while white matter conducts information between the brain and peripheral nerves. Okay. The gray matter of the spinal cord contains interneurons and motor neurons cell bodies that process and integrate reflexes. The surrounding white matter contains ascending, sensory, and descending motor tracts that transmit information to and from the brain. And another question. Which of the following statements best summarizes the anatomy and physiology of the brain? A, the cerebellum controls reasoning and emotion. I just want to go back to that question again. I'm just already running off. Read the question again. Which of the following statements best summarizes? Best summarizes. We're looking for the best choice. Anatomy and physiology of the brain. We're looking at the brain. All right. Okay. Cerebellum controls reasoning and emotion, while cerebrum regulates balance and coordination. I think those are switched. Okay, so that's not the best one. B, the brainstem manages automatic life functions such as breathing and heart rate. Okay, while the cerebrum handles higher thought and voluntary movement. Okay, I like that one. C, the diencephalon is responsible for conscious control of skeletal muscles and sensory interpretation. No, I don't think that's true. I think that is more the cerebellum for the conscious control of skeletal muscles. And then D, the cerebrum connects directly to the spinal nerves and processes reflexes without brain involvement. The cerebrum is the brain, and it's the spinal cord that processes reflexes. Okay. All right, so what did we say? B was the best one. The brainstem manages automatic life functions such as breathing and heart rate, while the cerebrum handles higher thought and voluntary movement. The brain's major regions work together to coordinate all body functions. The brainstem regulates vital autonomic activities like respiration and heart rate. The cerebrum refines balance and movement, and the cerebellum refines balance and movement, and the cerebrum governs voluntary actions, memory, and conscious thought. And that's all we have for today. Something I forgot to mention earlier in the video. Here I am at the very end. Make sure and get your PDF of the slideshow of this video so that you can use it as a study resource without having to get on YouTube and watch the whole video again. Unless you want to, you can watch this as many times as you want. Make sure and get your free resources. Go ahead and subscribe, like the video. It means a lot for the channel for getting this information out to other future massage therapists in training. So I will see you on the next video where we're going to be talking about the peripheral nervous system. All right, see you there. Toodaloo.